Hello and welcome to Ex Cult Ed, the podcast where I share my experiences, thoughts and feelings after leaving the truth, otherwise known as the 2x2 way, the fellowship, the one true way. You get the picture. My hope is that in sharing this it will be cathartic for me and perhaps make you, dear listener, feel less alone if you've been through or are going through something similar. This is my story. This episode has topics of death and suicide. It's an interesting thing thinking back on how much my relationship with death has changed since leaving the cult. When I was in the cult, this life was viewed as just a transition period. We were mere travelers passing through this world on the way to the next. This life was the short time where we proved ourselves and prepared ourselves for eternity. So it's not surprising that hardly any emphasis was placed on our individual happiness or our individual enjoyment of this life and this world. The whole focus was on life after death, which was something we all looked forward to. Death wasn't something to be feared. It was one step closer to our Father in heaven. I attended a lot of funerals as a child. If anyone in the cult in our area passed away, we would all dutifully attend. And the funeral would more often than not be used as an opportunity to remind us how important it was to be faithful so we too could go to heaven. The preachers would speak at funerals about how faithful the person was and how God had finally called them home. Whoever's mother, father, brother, son, aunt, grandfather it was that had passed away would be raised up on a pedestal as an example of a faithful soul who was ready to go home. We all went away feeling like we should be more like them so that we could end in such a dignified way. I can't really talk about death without talking about life. After all, the way you view death is largely dependent on how you view the purpose of life, and vice versa. A listener who is still in the cult emailed me recently and said, "I feel it supports me to have a belief that there is something to live for beyond just life itself. And I fully understand wanting that comfort and security. Being in the cult gave us all an existential meaning. Our life had a clear purpose, to serve God and get to heaven. Not only did we have hope for an amazing life after death, but we had the exact blueprint on how to get there. The cult told us to live for God and Jesus first, others second, and ourselves last. Our views on death took away all the uncertainty and worry about life. Our lives were in God's hands to use and take whenever He pleased." Another thing the cult gave us was a sense that we actually matter in the world, that some higher being cares about us as individuals. Everybody likes to feel special, and to think that this higher power who sees all and knows all would take an interest in you specifically, that can be an amazing feeling. Knowing that this higher power actually cares about you gives you a sense of value. It makes your life feel special, and it gives you comfort that your death means something. All my life, I'd been given a clear path to follow, which led to a feeling of safety and security. People want to have a path and a purpose, and cults are especially good at handing those out, just like Santa throwing out lollies at the Christmas pageant. People also want to be surrounded by people who follow the same thing because it further reinforces their feelings of being right and safe. There's safety in numbers, right? Especially if you're a defenseless sheep. I personally am quite traumatized by death because I lost my mum, who was my only support and safe person, when I was 16. I watched her get sick and I was with her through the whole process. During this time, I was told that it was my fault mum was sick because I'd left God's way as a teenager. During this time, I really struggled with my beliefs. I wanted to believe that everything she'd suffered in this life was for a greater purpose. I wanted to believe that her choice to not remarry and to struggle through as a single mother to me was for a good cause. I wanted to believe that after all the pain and suffering of being sick, that she was going to a better place where she would be happy and I would meet her again. When Mum died, I lost a lot of my purpose because she was the person I loved the most, and thus lived for the most, aside from God, of course. So, in my extreme grief and my strong desire to be the best daughter and person Mum would have wanted me to be, I went back to the cult. For a while, I found great comfort in the Bible and being accepted back into the fold. But the cognitive dissonance soon set in again. The main thing that kept me there for so long was struggling with the idea that maybe Mum didn't go anywhere after death. Maybe she no longer existed at all. The thought that Mum had lived her whole life following a strict set of rules and beliefs, instead of enjoying this existence and this life while she could, really haunted me. And it was the one thing that I really struggled to accept. So I spent the next 10 years constantly trying to squash my ever-growing doubts, concerns, unhappiness, and unease, and instead trying to pray harder, get a closer connection with God, and be the person Mum would have wanted me to be. But living for someone else, especially someone who is no longer living, is not life and will never bring you true happiness. I was surrounded by people who spoke of joy, but it was such an elusive thing for me. And the less joy I felt, the more guilty I felt for not feeling joy when I should. When people left the cult, they were often spoken about in ways that made it seem like they died, because everyone really believed that their souls were doomed. They were often portrayed as lost sheep out there among the wolves, but in contradiction to that statement, were often spoken about as though they were now suddenly these awful, amoral people, doing terrible things and who should be avoided in case the devil inside them rubbed off on you and robbed you of salvation. In the end, it was my rapidly deteriorating mental health that led me to leave the cult. After all, if this life was so bad and joyless that I was going to take myself out of it, which would have been a sin anyway, what did I have to lose? When I eventually left, I really struggled with my own mortality. I was terrified of everything. I was scared I'd get hit by a car crossing the road, or fall down a lift, or get bitten by a shark, or have a heart attack and die, because death was now this terrifying thing that I was so scared to confront. Back then, in the early days, I felt like death was chasing me all the time. I felt like everyone in the cult was waiting for my downfall so they could tell each other, "See, this is what happens when you leave the protection and safety of the fold." The feeling of guilt and being watched that I had when I was in the cult and on my way up the stairs to the movies was intensified so much that I was constantly on the lookout for anyone who might be in the cult and see me living my new rebel life. Death itself suddenly became this huge lonely thing because not only did I not have any friends or family to face it with, I didn't have God or Jesus to guide me through it either, and that was terrifying. And now suddenly I had no set purpose, nobody telling me how to live my life and what I should be living it for. Suddenly there was no comfort in death and life became chaos. Going from order to chaos is no easy thing. I guess you could call it an existential crisis. I really questioned what it meant to live a meaningful life, and was that even possible? So what do you do if you're not given a purpose in life? Well, you have to try to find it yourself. And which is more profound? Being told exactly how to spend every moment in order to have a true purpose? Or exploring, making mistakes, but always striving to find your own purpose and the things that make you happy? I would argue the latter. Now that I've both left the cult and lost the person that gave my life meaning, I'm still finding a new purpose and meaning for life. In fact, I'm also contemplating the idea of life not having a meaning or purpose other than to be happy, appreciate all the little things, and make the most of the time we have here. If I wasn't created by a higher being for a specific purpose, then my existence is a happy accident, which to me makes it all the more lucky and special. If I am only here by chance, and my death will also be random chance, then I have to make the most of every moment. I have to make sure I put my energy into people and things that make me happy, because this is all I get. One life, one chance to explore all it has to offer. And if I choose to be a good person, that choice is all the more powerful because I'm doing it for myself and myself only. Knowing that I choose to try my best to be a loving, kind, and caring person because that's who I want to be and that's the legacy I want to leave behind for myself means a lot more to me than doing it because some higher power says I have to. Now the choices I make in life are just for me and not out of fear of hellfire. And death is scary, particularly the pain and the not knowing side of it. But that just makes life so much more exciting. Death is part of life, and knowing we're going to die and not knowing what comes after, for me, makes every moment I'm alive so much more precious and special. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate you. If you'd like to reach out, ask any questions, vent, say whatever you need to say, even if that's getting annoyed about something I've said, email me at exculted@gmail.com. That's exculted@gmail.com. And always remember, you can walk your own way, speak your own truth, and live your own life. Bye!